Hello and welcome to the July 1st edition of the Cluster API Provider AWS Office Hours, a subproject of Cluster API and SIG Cluster Lifecycle. We have a decent size agenda today, but if you have any additional topics, please go ahead and add them to the agenda. And if you would like, please go ahead and add yourself to the attending list as well. To start off today, we did have a version 0.3.2 release late last week that included updates to the Cluster API components to version 0.1.4. It also supports logging of user data size. I know there have been some concerns that we're going to be bumping into size limits there soon, so we want to go ahead and start logging that to be a little proactive there. And then also support was added for the Cluster API Node-REF controller as well. It did include a bug with the RBAC rules, so we also had a version 0.3.3 release, and that went out this morning that included the fixes for those RBAC rules that were breaking the cluster cuddle delete workflow. I also wanted to let people know that we are going through another round of Cluster API t-shirts. So if you haven't already received one and you would like to, please go ahead and click through that link, the link in the notes, and go ahead and add yourself to that list. Also, please reach out to me privately, either over email or Slack, with your address so that we can go ahead and get those mailed off to you as well. Other than that, also there's a PR request to go ahead and add Andy to the maintainer's role, which aligns with the permissions that he actually already has today on the GitHub repo permissions. So if everybody can go ahead and please click through there, we'll give that, what do you think, 1 week timeout for that?
That's fine with me. Either a week from today or a week from when it was open. Either is fine.
Yeah, let's do a week from. Oh, what was that?
I mean, Wednesday is our next meeting. It was opened last week. I thought we would just merge it after the meeting.
Well, there was the one for the Cluster API repo, but there was also one for the AWS repo as well.
Oh.
I think usually we do 1 week from when the PR has been open. So.
Yep. That sounds good to me. All right, and with that, I'm going to hand it off to you, Andy.
Thanks, Jason. So I wanted to talk about milestone naming, and this applies to Cluster API as well, but we'll start here since the meeting's today. I would like to propose that in GitHub that we start naming our milestones based on semver instead of API version. Mainly because the API version potentially spans multiple semvers. For example, Kappa 0.2 and 0.3 are both technically v1 alpha 1 when you look at the API version. And I think that we hopefully can think both about breaking changes that are code-wise, but not necessarily API breaking changes. So between 0.3 and 0.4, we make a decision that 0.4 is going to be v1 alpha 2 or not. Maybe it comes later, but I'd like to try and track things based on semver and GitHub if people are okay with that.
I think that's good if we're tracking by minor version and we don't try to get to the granularity of patch version.
Yeah, I'm not particularly concerned about doing milestones for 0.40, 0.41, and so on. I just want to break from using the API version as our milestone naming.
I think that's fine. Another thing that I was thinking is to add maybe a label for like the API version type, so that when, for example, like we have a PR issue, we can tag it and quickly go through and check which one, unless you want to open a project instead for API versions. I guess I'm more thinking about upstream, but
where would you use this?
maybe we can use GitHub projects to do this, but just just a way to be like a group, like for example, like multiple PRs or issues together, like specifically targeting the API version type, so that we can say, hey, all these versions are actually V1 Alpha 1, and all these issues are actually V1 Alpha 1. Because the API version is like a quick way to reroute things, right? Like if you have an issue, it's like, oh yeah, this is like definitely V1 Alpha 1. And then the milestone can be different for sure. I'm fine with similar.
Yeah, I guess let's see how the labeling goes versus a project, and maybe we could identify a series of issues or PRs, and we can figure out if it makes more sense to try and do a project or a label. Any other comments on milestone naming convention? Okay, I have the next one too. I don't know if we want to talk about this one explicitly or just do it all in the backlog grooming, which I'd like to do. But we are interested in being able to do API server webhook token authentication configuration, which is something that we can do with kubeadm as part of the init process, but it means that we need to get some additional files into the user data so that they can make their way ultimately into the EC2 VM and then finally into the API server pod. So it's a couple of CA certificates and a key and a config file. And that was one of the reasons that we added the logging of user data size, because there is a hard limit that AWS has. And we, I think, are around 10 kilobytes right now, which gives us about 5 or 6 of wiggle room. Hopefully we won't hit it, but I did link to the issue, and ideally we would find some way or set of ways that could apply regardless of cloud provider or on-premises bare metal. But I think it's worth trying to, if you haven't reviewed the options that are in this PR or in this GitHub issue, I know Nadir and some others had put down some ideas. So if anybody wants to talk about it now, that's cool. If you want to take some time and read it and do it asynchronously, that's fine as well.
I can probably speak to some of the suggestions. So I'm not saying this is the way, but listed 3 APIs that AWS have that enable us to insert data onto a machine beyond the limits of user data. So there's AWS Simple Systems Manager Parameter Store, which is a key value store for a region in EC2. So it supports prefixes. You can set ACLs on them. There's DynamoDB. AWS used that a lot, I think, internally. And finally, AWS S3. They've all got different drawbacks and positives. From a cross-platform perspective, the only one that is vaguely cross-platform is S3, because you can get off-the-shelf open source equivalents. But there's a trade-off in complexity for the end user. Yeah.
All right, well, it sounds like possibly some async reading and communicating would make the most sense here. But this is something that we're interested in figuring out what we want to do and proceeding to implement it this month. So just wanted to mention that. Jason, I guess back to you briefly.
Does anybody else have any other topics before we move on to the backlog grooming? Nope. All right. Right back to you then, Andy.
Okay, I'm just getting my browser ready to share. I would appreciate it if, to try and do this quickly, if one or two people would like to volunteer to either close out things as we go through them or add comments so that so that you're not watching me type. That would be quite appreciated. And thanks. I'm starting.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I heard Vince say something at the same time as I did.
Okay, Vince.
Oh, I just volunteered to help with the typing.
Okay.
Awesome. Were you also volunteering, Chuck?
I was, but I don't really care who does it.
We can ping pong, whatever. So I've got all the issues open for Kappa, and I'm starting at the oldest one. So 69 variants. This was opened a while ago, and I know this is this was before we were working on the V1 Alpha 2 ideas and everything. So I think there's probably some stuff in here that is definitely worth keeping, but I don't know that we need exactly all the things that are in here in terms of, because I think they'll span different portions of the API as it evolves for like control plane flavors, for example. So, and do we all, I guess first question, do we want to keep this open, or does it make sense to try and split this into smaller actionable things as we get to V1 Alpha 2 and beyond?
This feels like a list of use cases. Is it? I didn't read the whole comment thread. Is this more than that?
My understanding is, yes, it is a bunch of use cases, but if this were going to be implemented, my guess is that this could turn into a series of configuration settings where you can pick, for example, one VPC for a group of nodes versus a shared VPC with different subnets and security groups. So I personally feel like we could close this and reference it to create new issues that are smaller in scope and more directed.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like there's a lot of actionable things here, or they're actionable but they're too large to like fit into this issue.
Yeah, and there's like a lot of concepts in here.
So I agree with you, Andy.
Okay. Any other comments? All right. So Vince or Chuck, could one of you add a comment and close this out?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I'm doing it because my keyboard is newer.
Thanks. All right. Next up, 78 metrics tracing. Nadir, you open this one.
I think some people have done some work on it. I don't know where it got to, or it was going to be looked at.
Okay, and there's some comments about using this as an umbrella issue. So I think it's probably, we can keep this open, and it's probably appropriate that it's important long-term and help wanted. Does anybody want to make any changes to this, or is it good the way that it is?
It might be worth syncing up with SIG instrumentation, find out what their latest advice is, because I think it might change recently.
Okay. Can you do that, Nadir?
Yep, I will do that.
Okay, thank you. All right. We have variants and provider config. So given that we just closed the variants issue, we probably can close this one.
Go for it.
Seem reasonable?
You can
So
just,
variants kind of fit pretty well into V1 Alpha 2, right?
I think that there are aspects that do.
Yeah.
So in terms of saying, like, a variant could be whether I'm using Kubernetes or Rancher or OpenShift, like that fits in pretty well. Trying to say something like EKS versus full-blown kubeadm-based cluster doesn't really fit in because we don't have the control plane data structure yet to to distinguish between those types of things, but we're working on it.
Got it. Got it.
All right, so could somebody close this one, please?
I close it. Yeah.
Okay. NAT gateway variants and configs. Follow up from some comment over here. Do we want to create a new NAT gateway for each public subnet or one per AZ? I know Nadir and Vince, you're going back and forth on this one. Do you recall?
This was ancient history.
Yeah, I know.
No idea.
All right, I'm going to suggest either we read through this back and forth and try and figure out exactly what we want to do for 89, or we just close it.
So this is one of the places where variants are still going to be an issue. This and the public versus private subnets are probably the two big places where post V1 Alpha 2 we're going to still have to try to address.
Do we just need to have a greater series of configuration knobs in the AWS specific configuration that can do these different variants?
Actually, I've got a question here. So these comments come from September. So at that time, we did not support existing VPC infrastructure, and now we do. So
that was linked.
How much of that complexity do we want to enable versus saying, if you do want to do something different, bring along your own VPC?
I think that's fine. I also was reading my comment on 81, and reading through the code, and I think we actually do create now one subnet, one NAT gateway for each public subnet.
Yeah, I think New Relic added it. So I'm happy with saying, if you want a slightly different network architecture, bring it along as your own VPC configuration.
Yeah.
Which happened after these set of comments anyway.
Yeah, I agree with you, Nadir. So I think following the KOps model, which is the same, if you have a custom configuration, just bring your own.
Certainly makes coding easier since we don't have to go do all that stuff. Jason, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm good with that approach.
Okay, so let's close out 89, please.
Sure thing.
All right. Support mutation of certain attributes of machine object during update. Jason, you opened this one back in September. I'm wondering if any of the things that you wrote here change based on a better definition of what's mutable and what's not from the past couple of months.
Yeah, I think we can go ahead and close this out because we determined for V1 Alpha 2 we were going to make the underlying instances, treat them as
Awesome.
immutable.
Thank you. Okay, this one is a similar question, I believe. Or maybe not. This is about upgrading Kubernetes version.
Yes, this is related to upgrade. I think again we can likely close this out considering we're handling that externally for V1 Alpha 1 and Alpha 2, and we'll internalize it later.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll close it.
Better name for one of the packages that we have, Cloud AWS Services. Chuck, you had put in an idea of what you were interested in seeing.
I think at this point, it's not really worth it, but
I would agree.
Okay. Should we check in with Liz just to see if she's still...
So this is what was actually opened by one of Tim's walkthroughs.
Okay. All right. Do y'all vote we should close it?
Yeah.
Okay. Better AWS credentials management post pivot. I know Nadir, you opened this one.
Yeah, depends how important. So it's how do you get rid of the secret on the pivoted cluster and switch it to using instance profile? So I think the things we talked about is using annotations on objects we didn't want to pivot. So we would do that in the cluster API repo in cluster Cuttle, I think. So yeah.
And did this one get implemented, or did it just, it did get closed?
Oh, there's a added bootstrap only components to cluster Cuttle as an option. Don't know what.
Yeah, Jason, do you recall the details on this one?
Yeah, I do. We looked at trying to exclude things, and it turned out that it was going to be much more complex than we initially thought. And that's why Loka eventually went with the bootstrap only components. We never incorporated that back into the Cluster API provider AWS though.
Okay, so I think it's appropriate to leave this open. Do we want to try and tackle this in our next release as part of the V1 Alpha 2 work?
I don't know the priority of this.
So I'd say this is like a low priority, even backlog, because cluster code is being reworked, and pivot should be kind of like considered as like a secondary to like a management cluster, even if used kind. And then the whole secret can just go away, and we can just use IAM permissions.
We do also have documentation today for how to use IAM permissions manually.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll backlog this one.
What do you think, Nadir?
Yeah, totally agree with that.
Okay. 1, 2, 3. PR blocking tests. I believe we did the initial work to get this done, but I think there's probably still more tests we could write.
I think it's probably safe to close the generic issue at this point, and we can just follow up with more specific issues if we need to.
Okay.
I agree. Can iterate on what we've got.
Okay.
Close it.
Multi-AZ deployment proposal. So I know that we added the ability to specify multiple subnets when you're deploying things.
Yeah, actually, I had a PR like a long time ago. If you scroll down, I think there should be a PR that adds another flag. Yeah, that one.
Oh no, this.
I think this issue is dealt with the bring your own VPC and combination of being able to specify the AZ.
Yeah, but you can actually also just let Kappa handle that for you. The problem is like it's the machine deployment is not automated, right? Like we'll always pick the first subnet, which is less than ideal. So maybe we can close this one and revisit them.
Are you saying in the machine you specify the AZ rather than the subnet ID?
We added support for that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
But there's
Yeah,
no
we might need to-
strategy. I think it's just the first one.
Yeah, I think maybe we should revisit that. But I think that's a separate issue.
Yeah.
All right. So is it appropriate to close this one?
I think so.
Umbrella UX and getting started experience improvements. All right, I think the first bullet point is going to get addressed as we evolve to V1 Alpha 2 and beyond, and we do the operator instead of cluster cuddle. How much of this, Jason, since you opened it, do you think is Kappa versus CAPI?
It's all muddled together. There might be a few things that we can pull out of this to track as more granular issues, and then I think we can go ahead and close this out.
Yeah, I know Ruben had put some stuff in here. I mean, we can leave this open with a to-do to break it into separate issues if that makes the most sense.
I think we should close this and iterate on what we've got instead of having just an umbrella issue open. But I guess we do want to make sure that all the comments that were made were addressed. So yeah, that seems reasonable.
Okay, so Chuck or Vince, can you just add a comment for what we need to do? Thanks. Is this the same thing we just talked about?
Yeah.
All right, so this is basically now that we have the bootstrap only, go ahead and actually do it. Do we want to close this one like we did the other one?
If we close, that would be a won't fix, right? Like, because we have a way to fix it, but we won't.
I mean, it feels like this is the same thing that we just talked about a couple minutes ago.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm fine closing.
Cluster cuddle requires many parents. I'm going to skip over. Actually, let's just close anything related to cluster cuddle, and it'll get dealt with as part of the re-envisioning of that flow.
Cool. Sounds good.
Handling AWS resources for cluster add-ons. All right, so we have
the fun part. Specifically, this is around, we discussed this around Calico, because right now we hard code the security group rules for Calico. But if somebody wanted to swap out a different CNI provider, we don't have a way to account for the security group rules for that. And that's what this is basically tracking. That said, considering that we're talking about breaking out aspects with the V1 Alpha 2 and beyond work, this might be something that we need to track in CAPI itself.
So I have a question, and this is kind of an extreme, but I am curious. Was there ever any consideration to using CRDs to track all of the AWS resources that we create, including things like security groups?
There haven't been to date.
And like I said, it's an extreme, but were we to do that or some aspect of it, then we could have some defaulting. If you don't specify security groups we expect to see, like then Kappa could default them. And if you wanted something, then you could supply your own. Or it doesn't necessarily have to be fully modeled as individual CRDs, but as we're designing the types for V1 Alpha 2, we could potentially decide to include some substructs that could let you specify things like this.
I think it would probably be better, especially considering the way that we're trying to break apart the components. If we were going to go that route, I think we need to go something that is relatively cloud agnostic and an abstraction that is relatively safe across multiple providers. Otherwise, we're pawning off on the end user to know all of the details of the implementation to be able to just get some like a CNI provider to work.
Yeah, that makes sense. So do we want to open a new issue in Cluster API about things like firewall rules?
Are we ready to talk about that there yet?
Well, at the very least, we can close this and open an issue and
Yeah.
get around to talking about it eventually.
I just know that this has been an area of contention in the past when we start talking about having to abstract things from cloud providers.
Fair. So what do you want to do about this one then?
I was gonna say maybe this particular issue for the AWS provider can be solved by just letting the users customize the security group rules and just adding the defaults when we don't have them. So just keep a backward compatible way to deal with those, but let the user specify their own if they want to change the add-ons, because they could, right? But I definitely wouldn't solve the larger issue for V1 Alpha 2.
Well, and once we start talking about the add-on management, then it gets a little bit more complicated because we need to be able to, get that data from the add-on manager rather than from the end user.
So I don't think it would be too harmful as we're working on V1 Alpha 2 to allow the user to specify their own security group definitions for AWS specifically.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a separate issue though, I think. Right?
What is?
What you just said.
So you want to, we could retitle this one to specifically handle security group customization in V1 Alpha 2, or we could make a new one. Either's fine with me. This one basically talks about security groups.
Yeah, retitle it seems appropriate, given that cluster add-ons we'll tackle it upstream anyway.
Yeah, I literally created that issue after a cluster add-on meeting, or I think one of the first ones. So, yeah.
Something like that. Ability to customize security group rules.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we'll put this, I need to make a new milestone now that we actually have our first issue to put in V1 Alpha 2. So given that I want to do this on Semver and everybody agreed, shall we say that 0.4 for Kappa is going to be for V1 Alpha 2?
So what if we need to release a new version of V1 Alpha 1? Are we going to keep using 0.3 or we're going to go 0.5?
Yeah. Odd numbers are V1 Alpha 1.
If we need the wiggle room, we can, but we can't predict the future. But what's the likelihood that we're going to have a behavioral breaking change that applies to the V1 Alpha 1 API in between now and when we have V1 Alpha 2 ready?
I don't anticipate anything.
Yeah, I guess at this point.
Yeah, and we can always rename.
And if we do, we can always rename this milestone.
That's true.
Okay, now we have a milestone, and I need to refresh. Okay. Where was I? Support for external etcd. I'm wondering if this belongs more to the Kubidium bootstrapper.
So
We would need infrastructure.
maybe, well, so maybe with V1 Alpha 2, because we're not addressing control plane management now, it would still be covered under this. But this is specifically about being able to have a managed external etcd stack.
That Kappa is not responsible for managing, or that it.
No, that Kappa is responsible for managing. Yep.
Okay. One thing that I've wondered as we were designing the V1 Alpha 2 machine API and data types is we don't have any way to easily say we're going to create a machine and we want to run something that's not Kubernetes on it, like etcd. So I don't know if that's a goal that we should try and do for V1 Alpha 3 or as part of the V1 Alpha 2 work, but the current data types for V1 Alpha 2 don't really lend themselves to trying to say this is a machine for etcd.
Yeah, so this is something that has come back as requirements every time we've talked to kind of a lot of customer-facing folks, because that's the architecture that is being modeled the most there to date with the management methods that they're familiar with. So not necessarily co-locating and managing etcd on the same nodes and shifting that failure domain over to a different set of hosts.
I got a question. Is etcd, external etcd, as considered as part of control plane?
Yes.
So we do have the label upstream to determine the control plane, and as far as I know, the user data doesn't actually preclude you to actually run etcd only and not run any Kubernetes services. So technically, that could be done in a hacky way, right? Like in V1 Alpha 2. But if we want to support for roles, that's like a different.
So this isn't some that I would consider that we would try to tackle really for V1 Alpha 2. This is some that I think would be like a subset of control plane management as we start looking at like V1 Alpha 3.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, so I put 2 on here. Okay, host AMIs by the CNCF.
Okay, that's closable. That's just not going to happen.
No?
No. I mean, we could follow up with Ehor. I don't think that. Actually, what was the resolution of specifically AMIs? We have a good strategy for container images. I don't know if we're going to be able to do AMIs with CNCF accounts.
This is some that we can probably close anyway, and this is probably some that we'll try to tackle as part of the image making work that's happening in SIG cluster lifecycle.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
All right, let's close this one out then. Okay, document or support running in environments with TLS intercepting proxies.
Yeah, so that was a UX thing after somebody ran into an issue. This is even just doing the bootstrap. I think it's not high priority, but it's probably would be good to document. That's the point.
This is something that we might likely move to the bootstrap provider as well.
Okay, I'll leave it as log term for now. And, well, I guess, is this something we'd want to try and do by the time we get Alpha 2 out the door? No.
I think so.
Okay. Document what you get in a cluster. I don't think this is rotten.
Oh, we actually recently had a request for this.
Yeah, I know.
now run.
And this is documentation.
I think it should go in our milestone.
Yeah, I think this should go in the milestone. Anyone interested in signing up for this one?
I'll do it. It's been there way too long.
Yeah. Tagging failures can result in orphaned resources.
Oh, I didn't realize we had a bug for this one. Yeah, I had opened one not too long ago with the same problem. I think, Jason, you picked up this work for retrying tags? Yeah.
Yeah, assign it to me, and it can be the next milestone.
Okay. Thanks, Jason. Fix up namespaces for the providers.
We did this, I think.
So
I haven't noticed anything weird about the.
Yeah, I think we can close this.
I think so. Yeah.
All right, let's get it closed.
Okay, no worries.
So we actually have a couple here about the kubeadm Cloud Init module. There's this one, and there's another one on the first page about not using the custom forked Cloud Init module and going back to upstream or getting it merged in. So why don't we? Or go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think the Cloud Init module is mature enough or has enough features to get us to the point where we can go ahead and upstream it in Cloud Init. So if we do want to go the bash-based approach for now, then I think that's fine.
Could we actually bring the fork into the new kubeadm Bootstrap repo instead?
Well, the problem is it's a fork of the Cloud Init repo and not just a single module.
I see.
Yeah, and it ends up being an RPM or a deb that gets installed in the image, the OS image. I think it would make sense not to use a fork anymore in the future.
So
is it possible to break it out by any chance, like as a separate RPM deb that could be installed over the top, or is it too tightly coupled in Cloud Init?
So it's already an RPM or a deb that, oh, you mean like, the problem is that depending on which OS you're talking about, it's either Python 2 or Python 3. They might be in different locations. There are different files and different modules that are enabled on startup. So the only way to ensure that there's consistency is to have a fork of Cloud Init right now. And even if we did upstream it, we would still be installing a version of Cloud Init that isn't necessarily the default for the OS image, because who knows when Fedora or CentOS or any of the other OSs would rebase and consume the new version from upstream too.
How much logic and code is there in the forked module to do the kubeadm work, or is it really just here's the config file and here's the init or join, and it's literally just going to run kubeadm init or join? That's
pretty much what it is today. Longer term, I wanted to have a little bit more safety around there, but it just hasn't materialized.
So in the short term, we could go back to using the pure pre-installed available versions of Cloud Init and just do a bash script to call kubeadm, right?
Yep. The one thing there is that will add to the size of the user data as well too.
Is it that much though?
I mean, it's more than it is today.
Well, but I mean, it's saying here's a shell script, and the command is kubeadm init or join with a config flag, right?
Yeah.
Can we build a script into the image and then just call that? Save
That's
a few.
what I was thinking.
Yeah, we could potentially do that too.
I mean, let's see how much data, more data we're talking about though before building stuff into the image?
Yeah, I mean, from what I recall looking at, where is this? Is this in instances? Where's the thing that generates the YAML?
User data package.
Yeah, I mean, it's literally like this, right? So we're talking about changing what I have highlighted into a shell script that is on one line, right?
Well, it's a shell script that, you know, also has to kind of be somewhat safe too. So it's going to be more than just running kubeadm join potentially.
But what are you thinking it would do?
I'm not entirely sure right now, but I mean,
Maybe we can discuss this on the issue and just move on.
All right. Well, in terms of extending it to support CLI arguments,
At the issue with what we've been discussing. Just
yeah,
saying that we're not going to go the cloud init route, move back to Bash for now,
yeah,
learn about user data, et cetera, et cetera.
yeah. And reference, we'll get to it. Well, I don't know that we'll get to it in the next 12 minutes, but there is another issue that Moshe opened to convert back to the upstream. So we can just reference that.
Sure.
Are we doing that for V1 Alpha 1 as well, or just V1 Alpha 2?
I don't think we should try and do this for V1 Alpha 1.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that. +1 for me.
Okay. Where was I? Better CA private key management. I would like to try and tackle this as part of V1 Alpha 2 to at least switch to secrets instead of putting them on the spec.
well, that's something that would be part of the Bootstrap provider and not the AWS provider at that point, though.
Right. So let's close this.
Yep.
Okay. Restrict IAM policies further to only allow deletion and possibly update of resources. Okay. Nadir, you were working on this, but then...
Yeah, I tried it, but it was going to take quite a bit of testing and I had to move on to some customer work at the time.
Right.
So I've kind of left it open for now. I don't know if we want to do it from next. Could do. I don't know.
Well, let's talk about the priority first. Does P1 make sense here? I think this is probably more like a P2.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Yep.
And I'm fine putting in the milestone, but given that it's a P2, if we don't get to it, we'll move it to the next one. Okay. Open API CRD docs. This is about publishing document or the Open API docs somewhere. Yeah, and it looks like we'll get this in, we may get this in Kubernetes 115. Y'all want to try and do that, do this for the next milestone or not?
So it's probably going to be 116 plus before we get the actual Open API structural schema
Okay.
in CRD.
So let's just leave it where it is then.
I think
All
so.
This one I want to close because Michael is working on doing this for Cluster API itself now that we have remote node references. And he is working against master, but it should be easy to backport it to CAPI 0.1.x. So I think this is something we can just close. Okay. Make Docker build dev fails. Let's see.
I don't think we even have that make target anymore.
Oh yeah, I think the underlying issue is the
Python.
Python 3 compatibility in Bazel. One of the
Yeah.
Bazel rules Docker, I think.
All right, so let's close this, right? Or do we want to try and, is there anything documentation wise or Bazel/make wise that we can do to fix this?
So we hit this again recently, and now we override to Python 2. We force Python 2, so we should be fine with
All
this
right.
now.
So let's add that comment and close. Improved app experience on slow networks. Given that we're going to be switching to Go modules very soon, I'm not sure that this needs to stay open. What do y'all think?
Kill it.
All right, thanks, Nadir. Follow up from logging as dep PR. Chuck, what is
Oh,
this?
yeah. There was just a few things that were priority on the PR, some feedback. You can leave that open and keep it assigned.
Okay. All right, first page, 7 minutes left. Maybe we'll get these, maybe not. Replace cluster configuration with static pod manifest for the various pods. Remove kubeadm, init, and join. I don't think this is something we want to do.
This seems like something that would potentially be an alternative bootstrap controller in V1 Alpha 2 Plus, I think.
I actually think this is linked to the kubeadm security work that we're doing for 1.16, so allowing customization of static pod manifests. So we're going to solve this in kubeadm rather than solving it here.
Okay. Is there a GitHub issue for that, Nadir? I know we talked about it recently.
I will assign it to me. I will find out and then close it.
Thank you. Load balancer doesn't like multiple security groups on instances. Multiple tag security groups found.
Oh, this should be resolved now.
Because we changed the...
Yeah. That's why we had the breaking change for 0.3
Okay.
with the tagging.
All right, so we can close that?
Close it as fixed, yep.
Okay. Running generate YAML references a moved file. So I think we probably need to try one more time to get an update from the reporter. And, you know, hopefully we'll get a comment back. Now, do we normally set this to next because we've triaged it?
Yes,
Yeah.
we should.
Yep.
Okay. Isn't join should be thread safe. I'm working on this, so I'm going to leave it there. Actually, I'm going to make sure it's in the milestone. And I will be backporting this to, well, I'm writing it first for Kappa Master, which is against, or, you know, for V1 Alpha 1, and we'll make sure the same thing is available for V1 Alpha 2, although that code is going to probably get moved to, it's either going to get moved to a bootstrap provider or we need a control plane manager, like a stateful machine set or control plane set or something. But at least for the V1 Alpha 1 APIs, I'm going to get this coded. Add the ability to define a DNS alias. Let's see. Nobody's really looked at this other than Jason, you put next on here. I get some random named ELB. I want to have a nice name in Route 53, which is a C name. So we would need to be able to customize the kubeadm config for the API server URL. Is that accurate?
So there's that, but potentially what you would need to do is we would also need to be able to configure Route 53 and link that to the ELB as well.
Okay. I think
like a nice thing, but not an important thing.
I think that's.
Yep.
I think the labels are appropriate, and we'll leave it in next.
Yeah.
Cluster delete fails when cloud provider managed resources exist, like load balancer services. I'm assuming this applies to PVs as well.
So PVs, I don't think it applies to because they're not tied directly to the
Right.
VPC, but load balancers definitely do.
So P1, have we thought about how to resolve this?
So we've said in the past that we could potentially have one of two behaviors for this. We could either just have it be a blocking condition like it is today, or we can go ahead and just clean up those services of type load balancer or those load balancers automatically by going through and killing off the introspecting via tags and killing them off manually.
All right, I think we should, or I would suggest that we should tackle this in the next milestone. Does that seem reasonable? Anybody want to take this one? It's fair not to volunteer as well, and we can come back to it in a bit. Okay, I have another
I need
meeting.
to drop for another meeting.
Yeah, same here. So I'm going to say, I'm going over to the meeting minutes in another window and just saying last issue triaged was 773. We'll pick it up again either asynchronously or we can do it at the next meeting in 2 weeks. Thank you, everybody, and see you on Slack.
Bye.